Hi, can you hear us?
I could hear you now. Yeah.
Okay, great. Awesome. Sorry. Okay.
Okay, so sorry, my throat's a little. All right, so my name is Ariel, and my project is called Qualiatic. Um, and how do I hide these little guys on the side? 1 second. Okay, so yeah, so my name is Ariel or Qualiatic. I'm a multimedia artist, audio engineer. I have a tattoo practice, and I also am a neuroscience researcher. So this is just some pictures of some tattoo work I've done over recent years and from a show that I was playing a few years ago. So it's funny because I've never really put like in lineage how everything has kind of conceptually developed over time to get to what I'll be talking about with my tattoo practice. But I'm going to go over like a brief history of kind of how the conceptual work has developed over time to get to its current place and what my practice is going to look like moving forward as well. So I started out as a college student from 2012 to 2015, and I was studying neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy. And it was during that time that I started to make music and take creative work more seriously. It just kind of like I got the bug, I turned 20 and yeah, just started creating and it really like clicked. And the project name came kind of randomly just from this word that I felt really resonant with called qualia, which you might be familiar with. And it's basically the qualities of subjective experience that are not able to be communicated or like confirmed between multiple sources. So a funny example of that is like the dress. Like, was it blue? Was it gold? Like, no one's really sure. But it also has larger implications in terms of how we identify with like our existence and our ability to connect to and understand other people and feel understood. So, yeah, it started as a username and then it just kind of like stuck. So, soon after that, I was very distracted, wanting to just work on creative projects all the time. And I was having trouble staying grounded and balancing my studies. So, the first project that I did that kind of set the groundwork for everything that came after it was a grant project through my school, which was for just like a performance piece. And I wanted to try to integrate the work I was doing in neuroscience with the like new kind of obsessive hold that creative work had taken over me. And so I ended up working with an EEG BCI, Open BCI, which you are probably familiar with. And I used it in an interactive audiovisual performance. One sec, let me hide these little camera buttons over here because I can still see that. Okay. So basically, I had people come in and interact with the space. They could interact with the music or with certain visual elements. And I would also hook them up to the OpenBCI and they could see like their brain activity on the screen. And it was kind of theoretical, but the idea was that you could witness changes in people's physiological reactions to the space when other people interact with aspects of the audiovisual environment. So yeah, and I was, I guess, maybe 20, and it kind of like opened my world because as I was starting that work, I just learned that this cross-disciplinary technology, art kind of like world of work exists that I wasn't familiar with before. So yeah, that was kind of where the whole qualiatic and subjectivity and even like interfaces practice began. So, oh, I didn't know there was volume in this. Oh well. Okay, so um I moved to New York soon after that, and I started to just pick up whatever digital work I could. And I was also just exploring different softwares and learning how to um, combine different media in ways that I found interesting or exciting, ways that felt like they could extend like any one aspect of the work I was trying to communicate. And some of the first things that I did were some freelance projects. Like, for example, I worked on this augmented reality. I made an augmented reality app for the New York Hall of Science Planetarium, and people could go in and hold it around and sorry, my cat just came. Hold it around and see information pop up about the different constellations and stars. Um, and yeah, so that was a really interesting first experience for me with like building a handheld interface that people were engaging with in a space. And then I also made an interactive game that was also conceptual about the similar themes that I kind of focus on over and over again in my work, which have to do with identity formation and embodiment, generally speaking. And then down here, these are two little AR experiments that I did where I took drawings that I had made and I tried to make kind of a 3D sculpted version of them and then rig and animate them so that they could like show up and interact in AR. And then I ended up doing a talk at a Spotify collab event about how you can incorporate like augmented reality into kind of multimedia music approaches. So, and this was all pretty early on. I was very much experimenting with the technology and with my ideas for it. And it would eventually feed into how I approach the concept of tattooing and also my work like on a broader sense. So in 2019, I released an EP that was built on the basis of these characters that I had been drawing, which to me felt like physical embodiments of abstract emotional and psychological entities or representations of subconscious states. And they were basically a modality through which to interface with abstraction, like internal abstraction or external abstraction in terms of like consciousness and emotion, the subconscious in general. I felt that these beings kind of help us as humans like identify traits that help us understand these things better so that we can engage with abstract processes like understanding pain and like working through like healing process and also just understanding like how sorry my cat I'll be right back. So yeah, as I was building this presentation, I found it really interesting because I had never really thought of it this way before, but I noticed that there are a lot of themes that come up in my work of just different forms of interfaces. And I would consider these characters an interface between the tangible and the intangible, meaning like our ability to process abstract information and then that information itself, whether it's emotional or subconscious or theoretical. So yeah, I found that to be an interesting connection to the work at the lab. And on the right, that's the cover of the EP. So with that, I made a music video, which was an insane experience. I used all the money that I had, which was like less than $4,000. It was just on materials from the inception of like first having a conversation about the idea to the end of filming was only 2 weeks. Like all of the prosthetics, the casting, everything was done within that time. The set design, the filming, like to completion. And then I spent 6 months afterwards editing and coloring it. And I think that these are other representations of interfaces. And again, I believe that all of this ends up tying into like the approach that I have to tattooing and to designing tattoos as well. But yeah, just some more background. And in the middle there, that is a nail artist, Nails by Juan, who you might be familiar with. And it really made the shoot in terms of like these extensions of these beings, and the prosthetics as well. And there at the bottom, me and my friend are sculpting the spine to make the mold. And then there's like a 3D model that was included later on in the video. But yeah, this video was really bizarre because it felt like another level of interfacing, like in a really meta way, because it was like these abstract characters had become material. And then I was interfacing with the emotional and theoretical information in like a physical, embodied experience, which was really intense and interesting. Um, After that, I went on an extended tour, which was another form of like really embodiment. And I tattooed the entire way as well, which is something I'm going to talk about later in terms of how that experience shaped my approach to creating and conceptualizing tattoos. And in addition, after the tour, I made this merchandise, which is very tattoo-like, and it like especially the sleeves are very popular. And I think that there's something about the visual language and the way that you can really inhabit it because it's so full, like it covers the entirety of the shirt, the entirety of the sleeves. There's something about that that feels like interfacing with, um, yeah, just like the world of not this work, but like what this work represents on a broader sense, you know? And that's like a spread of some of the merchandise at my most recent tour. And then the shirt on the far right end is the dates from the previous tour. Um, so after I got back from that 6-month tour, I, on a whim, joined with a friend who was in town from Italy who makes sculptures. And he showed me kind of how he uses spray foam to make things like spikes. And I ended up making these like they were kind of felt like physical 3-dimensional versions of the anima characters, and then installed them in an event space at a venue where I used to throw shows quite frequently. So that was another interesting dimension and another interesting way to work with materials. Okay, so as an overview for this talk, I'm going to be focusing on a few things. I'm going to be stretching pretty broadly and moving through some things quickly because I want to mostly draw the connections, but the focus is going to be on the concept of transformation and utility. So how interfaces can be used to have a, specifically for me, what my focus has been in my tattoo practice is how to utilize tattoos to a certain ends of either a psychological or metaphysical sense of a transformation, which can be interpreted and read in many ways. It can be interpreted as abstractly as like ripples in quantum physics are changing as a result, or it can just be like placebo effect or like emotional connotation, you know? So, and I think all of it is very valid. Um, all right, so most of my work also sits at kind of this like middle ground where like science and art are meeting in the question of like embodiment. So I'll be talking about that quite a lot too. Um, and also specifically with more recently with consciousness in general, the human experience and healing. And then in terms of my thoughts for your class and for the work you're doing, I'm really interested in how you all can move forward with creating these on-skin interfaces in consideration of their transformative potential and their utility in these very human levels. Yeah, and this is me in my old room. So I have to start by providing a really crucial context for all of this. in my perspective and in my approach, and my ethos and ideology has been my experience just being in the underground, like alternative space, DIY queer scene because of how thinking occurs there and what it represents. And also the deep history of body modification and like experimentation with identity, self-expression, how people inhabit themselves, how people express like their dissent to conventional ways of being. It's all really critically embedded in these spaces. And there's also like a freedom to explore and experiment with these things that has been really fundamental to my own kind of cognitive development over the last 10 years since I've been in New York. So yeah, underground spaces as incubators for self-expression, radical self-expression trials with body modifications, um, and also where like experimentation with thinking and ideas and like new ways of considering disciplines, cross disciplines, the future, where there are a lot of rich conversations about these topics. Um, yeah. So I want to mention three specific experiences that I've had because I have a long history of organizing events. And there are three that I think are really important in terms of what they represent with embodiment and self-expression. So the first one was I did a residency for a year at this venue called Hollow in Queens. And I put on a show every other week for a year, every other Sunday night. And at these events, it ended up attracting a very specific kind of, let me just check the time. Be mindful of the time because I have a lot of slides that I want to go through. Okay. I'm gonna have to move faster. So basically I worked at the space so we could stay there until however late, like 7 a.m. And we would be tattooing and talking about like, I don't know, like even like transhumanism, just like talking about whatever was interesting to us and on our mind. And in this space, there was a lot of a feeling of freedom and curiosity. And then we would walk to the diner afterwards that was across the street, and we would eat in the diner and like talk about, I don't know, our feelings. And then we would come back 2 weeks later and do the same thing again. So, and it was that for a year. And there was always like an assortment of performers and different tattoo artists. And it just felt like a space where a lot of becoming was happening in a way that was really easy. And up on the top right is a photo of the booth where the tattooing used to happen, with the whole setup. And then there's a video on the bottom of me. This was one of the first times that I tattooed. When I first started tattooing, I was tattooing someone's belly on the floor while a friend teaches. Oh no. I don't know how to say this, but you get the idea. So this is like, that's where like it starts, which is fun, especially when you're that age. All right. So anyway, the next one was, it was a huge rave for New Year's Eve where me and some friends brought together every single collective that was throwing shows in New York at that time. So there were maybe like 10 or 15 collectives involved. And it was a real like bringing together of the community. And we organized the show for weeks and weeks. And it was the most insane process. But seeing the amount of liberation and connection between people who are in different subsets of the culture in general was just a hugely significant experience. And a lot of people look back to this event as like a really the peak moment for like the interconnectedness of the community here. It was really special. And then another one, which will be interesting to consider in terms of embodiment and digital interfaces, was during lockdown, several friends and I teamed up to throw an online festival for a few days. And it was on IMVU. And I made a space which I'm playing now, this was The Room. So obviously it's very fantasy, surreal, very otherkin, which IMVU is like that in general because you're using these avatars that you're dressing up as to represent yourself. But it was really ripe for, I mean, a lot of people also will grow up in their youth learning how to connect with people through these spaces because they can like inhabit an avatar that they might connect with more than their physical body. So I think that there's a lot of depth to, oh, that was my so that's how I identified at the time. Um and here, so that was everyone dancing. Anyway, that is just some background of my own personal inspirations in, I feel like I don't have enough time to get through all the material, but I might have to go really fast from this point. So this is basically just a brief overview of the history of biohacking in the underground and also cyberpunk ideology, which often has to do with questions about consciousness, human destiny, connection to the divine, technology as a spiritual interface, which is something that I'm really interested in, especially how that relates to like ancient ritualistic use of things like tattooing and body modification. That's all I'm going to say for that slide. And I think this one is self-explanatory. It's just like how you can use tattoos and body modification to transform your self-expression and how you interface with broader systems, and also empowerment, reclaiming autonomy, etc. So I want to briefly go over like ancient roots of body modification, like this mummified hand that was tattooed, and the tattoos were used as like spiritual, not even talismans, they weren't representational, like they had function. And that's what I feel really interested in. So how the symbolism itself has function, it's meant to invoke production or communication, to harness abstract energies, to serve as a bridge between the tangible and the intangible. And then also the ritualistic aspect of it, which means that basically there's an aspect of transformation occurring. The act of tattooing is itself, I feel, an act of transformation because it requires like trust, surrender, release. It's a physically intense experience. It has to mean something. It doesn't have to, but it can. And if it does, it can be extremely powerful because it's like something that you then carry with you that's embedded in you. And I think that that is very alchemical, and how you can, I feel very excited about how you can explore all of the different elements of that, like the psychological, emotional, spiritual, metaphysical elements. I just think that there's so much there if you want there to be. It doesn't have to be that way, but I think it's fun. And then I also feel very interested in the body as a machine that is built for the evolution of consciousness. So the body itself as an interface between our physical reality and our spiritual reality, and how modifying and bringing our body through physical ritual can be used to facilitate that kind of growth. And then tattoos as energetic interfaces, which is what I'll talk about when I get into the tattooing. This one I'm going to skip. I think it's more of the same concept. And then how it can be used for social evolution. Like, for example, communities like IMVU, people learn how to interact in new ways, generally first through digital modalities, like through the telephone, through online forums. And I think that it's the beginning of where a lot of shifts start to happen, and where, in terms of how humans interface with each other and with the larger world. And then beyond that, how we interface with our sense of reality. Like, we have now a concept of ourselves existing in this abstract point in space time that we can't like hold because we have like a digital footprint. And I think we are already, there's already a digital interface that's inside of our brains, just in terms of the way that we perceive reality because of how we use the internet. And I find that to be really interesting. I'm gonna skip these. Okay, so this is the second part of background that brings us to the tattooing utility. So I have a history with really severe chronic pain since a tailbone injury that I sustained in 2017, after which I wasn't able to sit at all for 2 years. And I was still actively working and touring and going to work. And I just wasn't able to sit. And it was really traumatic and intense. And it really shaped my worldview, like extremely from that point forward. And the research that I am doing now in neuroscience is specifically about chronic pain. And a novel theory that I found when I went back to school during COVID, completely by accident. It was because I had a really severe pain flare up. And I learned that I learned a new way of managing it that is beneficial. And then I also found a hole in the research, basically about the role of dopamine in the formation of chronic pain. So I have a lot to say on that, which I'm not going to get into here, but it has a lot of applications to human-computer interactions, to technological interfaces, to like healing and wellness technologies. And I think it's a place that I'm going to like pursue strongly from the throughway of the tattoo practice that I've been having. So yeah, and then I also wanted to say that in returning to school, like because of my experiences over the 7 years of being in New York, in these communities and involved in these ways, I really felt like I was able to bring an extremely expanded perspective to my work that allowed me to like put pieces together that I wouldn't have otherwise. So that is to say, to encourage you in the work that you're doing to just reach out as broadly as you can, because it's such a potent intersection of real aspects of existence that all have to do with each other and can be worked together in a profound way. So yeah, I just want to encourage you to really expand your thinking as much as you can. This is the model that I wrote up for my theory. I'm not going to go into it, but effectively it has to do with neuroplasticity and the chronification of pain stimuli that involve basically they pass through all of your higher cognitive regions and especially through dopaminergic pathways that specifically involve emotional meaning making and memory formation that has been associated with a likelihood to develop chronic pain. And that's why I have shifted my tattoo practice to being about emotional meaning making and the memories attached to the experience, because this is the thing that determines if a person's brain resolves from chronic pain or shifts into a perpetual chronic pain state. And it is not, there's hardly any research about it. So yeah, I feel like I'm really just still putting the pieces together, but I can sense that there's something that feels very significant like between all of these things. And maybe one of you will get an idea as you're working on interfaces. So I'm going to skip this one too. All right, this I'll talk about because this is basically the idea for the tattoos is to consider them quantum devices, as in they are functional devices that can take effect on a quantum or abstract, theoretical or metaphysical or physical level. We don't really know. But the idea that I really connected to was in terms of like for a movement to take place, like physically, the things that are required are an orientation on like a magnetic axis and an electrical potential, like potential energy or a charge to initiate the movement. This is true for neurons. This is true for, like, I believe all matter, most matter probably. But I thought it would be really interesting to connect orientation to intentionality, because it's like the direction of your energy, even theoretically. And then the charge is the emotional drive. So to tap into an emotional sentiment or resistance or impulse that pushes that um, potential energy into like a kinesthetic state through the intention, like in the direction of the intention. So that's kind of the idea. But beyond that, the broad idea is that using tattoos as quantum devices means that you are approaching the process of creating an on-skin interface, let's say, with the intention to have an effect on someone psychologically, physiologically, energetically, spiritually, to have an effect in some capacity, to have a function. And it also ties in with the chronic pain research, and also just a lot of research about psychology in general, and how our perception is so intensely shaped by the things like the things that I listed down there, like mental state, perception, expectation, bias, your emotional experience. Placebo works this way in many ways. Distortion, like our brain's ability to filter its interpretation of incoming stimuli is extremely strong. And I thought that even if you're just engaging with it on that level, it could have a profound effect to approach the process of tattooing that way. And then the question that I wanted to pose to the class for you to just reflect on as we continue is, how might an on-skin interface be similarly used as a tool for transformation? And how could the roles of intention and emotion function in creating these meaningful digital wearables? I'd be really interested to know. I think it's an interesting concept. And yeah, and then I also wanted to say the reason that I came up with this in the first place was this was already happening in individual sessions with individual people, but I wanted to create something more concrete, like a menu or like a structure for guidance, so that people could work with a tangible framework to approach their goal setting and like emotion, what emotion they were tapping into and how that was being utilized. So that's the main reason I wanted to create something written. And on the right is the praxis. I just call it the tattoo praxis. And at the top, there's a blurb. I don't know if you can read it from the screen because it's probably quite small on your end, but basically there's an overview of like what the general idea is. And then there's a section for the function or magnetic orientation, like what is the intended effect? And I honestly just wrote like a lot of words and waited for things to kind of like fit into a format naturally. But in this final form, they are broken up into different groups. And within those groups, there are different distributions of ways that you can, it's kind of like a theme and then like kind of your specific focus in that theme. And you can pick as many as you want, I always say, but it's just to give some kind of, I mean, I love language. I feel like language holds a lot of magic, even in terms of like subtle connotation, vowel sounds, the flow of the word. So just to have these words and these concepts for people to internalize as they go into a tattoo, I felt would be really powerful. And then at the bottom is the essence, the electrical potential, and what is the energetic drive behind this tattoo? Why are you getting it? What do you want out of it? Where are you in your life? What do you need change in? What do you need like new input in? What do you need guidance in? So the tattoo process generally involves like hours of really long conversations about these kinds of things, just like a therapy session, like just talking, and then the tattoo just comes easily after that, including the design. Like it just is a natural part of the process of knowing what somebody is needing out of it and how it can help them. And then on the left is a spread of all AI generated designs that I did literally just out of curiosity. I didn't put in any visual prompt. I just used the words on the Praxis sheet because I was just really curious what it would turn out. And I used 3 different AIs, which I'll explain in the next slides. But yeah, it was super interesting. And now I give some of these as tattoos or use them as reference. It was kind of just an experiment, but it was cool to interface with, I don't know, like this collective knowledge base and to see even the similarities between the designs that came out in the different software or the different, yeah. So this was from Runway, and I'll just explain the process of how I went through these, like whittling them down. Maybe that would be relevant to someone's approach. I'm very subtractive. I could never be additive. I've never been able to be. But I generated basically like thousands of images, and then I went through and I just selected out all the little individual designs that I liked the most. Here's another Runway one. And some of them were really cool and some of them were really strange. It was fun. And this one was like the free stable diffusion, like on some web page type thing. But some of these were also really interesting. And I love the full image designs. And this was Midjourney. These ones were more clean, but they were really good. And there were so many of them because they just kept being really good. And then after that, I went through all of these images and I put them on a giant page, and then I grouped them by theme, and then I grouped the themes by theme, and then I ended up with these kind of like art boards of related tattoos just so it's all kind of easier to look at and so people can, you know, get a sense of what kind of design they might want. But it was a really cool and rewarding process. I think it took maybe 2 months from start to finish. All right, so connection to chronic pain research briefly is intention and emotional state deeply influence our bodily state and our perception of pain, our experience of pain, our emotional reaction to pain, how much attention we pay to it, the meaning that we give it. So intention and emotional state can really shape our experience in a huge way. And yeah, and including it influences the morbidity of chronic pain. So it can have real life, long lasting implications to approach things. I mean, I guess you could even just call it mindfulness, but I like to make things a little more concrete than that. But yeah, so I would be really interested in how this could be applied to wearable technology. So I don't know if this is particularly relevant. Sorry about the sound. I didn't realize. But yeah, I just wrote a little note about the equipment in case that's something that is good for y'all to know or anyone's interested in. It's interesting working with different body contours, different skin types that absorb the ink differently. I've also noticed that people who have extremely high anxiety, their skin can be a little less receptive to the ink. So there's like, when you're working with skin, there's a lot that you're interfacing with in terms of the actual like cellular biology of the person who you're working with, which I didn't know. And I thought that was really cool. Yeah, that's it for that slide, I think. And then, so then just walking through the process of like designing the tattoo. Each tattoo I give is, unless it's like a flash tattoo, which happens and it's fun. But if it's like a custom, it's very personalized and it's not about, I don't think I've ever really approached a tattoo solely aesthetically. I think that in order for me to be able to involve myself in the process, I need to understand what it means to that person and how it's going to feel and why. Like, I think it's really all about the why for me. Why are we doing this tattoo? Why are you changing yourself in this way? Like, what can it do for you? What can I do as the person who's doing the ritual, you know? Um, so yeah, we'll talk about personal histories. I'll ask them generally like where they're at right now and something that they feel they're like facing. And I'll usually just open the floor and let them share, and then I'll kind of wait till information comes to me about how to direct that into like a functional design. And that completely shapes the design itself, like entirely. Um, and I have this bullet point about balancing the client's intention with my own artistic style, but that's not usually ever really a thing. Like, usually there's a lot of synergy and a desire to like envision things the same way, which is really cool. And but then also you want to choose where to put it in terms of like how it falls in the curves of their body. I really like to line things up with people's like pre-existing body structures. So if they have like a tendon that comes out a certain way, to like carry it through, like I think a lot about how energy flows through the body and how to pick that up in a tattoo and carry it forward through the like motion of the shape of the tattoo. And there are some examples that I'll show you of that coming up. But yeah, so finding like a nice little like dip in someone's elbow and putting something in there, like it feels very gentle to work with their body and like where their body might be holding an open space for an interface. And then yeah, the final part, which seems to be the most important part, because I asked some people for testimonials, and that's what they said, was imbuing the exchange with resonant memories that will be attached to the tattoo in the long run. So it's like the memories of what was happening around when they got the tattoo, what we were talking about, where we were, what was going on like contextually in life in that moment on that night. Um, yeah. I'm losing my voice here. So here's a basic example of a free-handed design. We talked a little bit about what we wanted to, what we wanted it to represent. And there's that hole as kind of like an entry point, and then there's this like expansion and then like a climbing up to the body. It's kind of like energies entering, being harnessed, and then like being articulated in. Which I really resonate with, like that kind of language for design. And that's all it was. It was just I think I used a Sharpie and then went in. And here is a tattoo that I did recently. And you can see in the video, they were very happy about their new friend. This is a kind of tattoo that I really enjoy doing, which I feel less stylistically attached to, but in terms of how it functions and what it does for people and the reactions that people have is so special. I call it like a familiar, and I'll base it on like their energy or like an energy that they need or want. So when we did this one, my friend was saying that they wanted a little spirit guide to look before they step, to show them if they're stepping the right direction or not in their life. Someone to kind of like look out for them and give them a little buzz if they're like going the wrong way or if they're stepping too soon. So what they said is mine is sometimes itching for 1 second, like sending them a sign. And then I know I need to stop for a minute and feel back into myself before my next move. And I noticed it's exactly where my cat cuddles people to say hello. It's like having a presence with me all the time. Putting my hand on it calms me down, helps me to connect to gratefulness. So this is a very sweet, very like pure, simple example of what this kind of tattoo can mean to someone when you go into it with like this approach. Like I could have just done this design and left it as that, and it wouldn't feel this way, you know? But it feels like a friend. It feels like a little spirit companion and something that they can like externalize thoughts and feelings and perspectives and opinions and sensations to. And it feels to me like it really ties into the anima characters that I would draw, because it's like, I think as humans, we often need a personification of an abstract force in order to understand or connect with it. And so I view these characters as a personification of some part of their energy that they need access to, um, or that they want better access to. And they really like I see people like light up when these tattoos are finished because they can like feel it come alive. And I think that's really powerful. So that's that one. Um, this is another one. I also did this. Oh, I wanted to add, I did this in Berlin and I did this other one in Berlin as well. Um, which I think tattooing while touring and traveling has added significance because it's a very like fertile and fleeting moment of connection where if someone is passing through, all of the conversations that you share in that time hold an extra weight to them. And then to be left with a permanent mark from those experiences, I think really amplifies um, the magnitude of value of those experiences. So I've really enjoyed working with people while I'm traveling, especially if I'm traveling for music, because there's already a personal connection that's felt. So, yeah, so my friend Jakob said, for me, it holds the most value in the conversations we had around it, and also as encapsulating of the time we had here when you came over to Berlin and were living with us. I was sleeping on their floor, on their kitchen floor for 3 weeks. It was great. And it's like a mark of that, and also a reminder of all the conversations we had and the depth of that context. It all goes into that. Whenever I see it, because I'm also every now and then thinking of the meaning of the placement, which I'll mention, and I sometimes press the button, but also the emotional connection to it and its effect on me. So the placement of this tattoo is on an acupuncture point, which is, I believe it was spleen 3. And it has to do with basically when I was asking my friend what they want this tattoo to mean for them, they were talking about wanting to get out of stagnation and something to kind of bring them energy to like move forward. So I thought it would be special to put this tattoo that is kind of like a button right on an acupuncture point that stimulates circulation and like flow so that they can like press on it and like actually be activating an acupressure point. Or even I'm also really interested in like the process of putting a tattoo there, the stimulation, the needle stimulation to that area, like what effect that might have. Or even just the knowledge that there is something there, the sensation of like knowing there is kind of like an energy body or an entity or ink like in that area. It was the first time that I really approached a tattoo with like meridians in mind, but I'm really interested in doing that, especially moving more into like a kind of like medical healing context and like holistic body care. So yeah, that was really special. And this last one, I'm not going to read all of this, but I'll go through some aspects of it. I did this big like lower like sacral piece on my friend who was talking about wanting to like get back in touch with their sensation and sensuality because they've spent many years in kind of a freeze state where they felt really disconnected from their body and really dissociated. And they don't have a good relationship with pleasure or with like relaxation. Um, and I want to point out the part where they said that what was most healing was the time we spent discussing it and the actual session itself. It was the calmest and most healing process. And they did literally fall asleep. They fell asleep for like a full hour while I had a needle under their belly button. And that's how grounded in the experience they were. Like they were experiencing pleasure and relaxation. They were given permission to be in their sensory system. Um, and yeah, and then they were reflecting on how they've considered tattoos in the past and how this changed their perspective a lot in terms of the way they want to think about like putting things on their body. Um, so this one was really meaningful. Um, and it was interesting because the shape itself, we were going for like a sigil, but they said that it didn't even feel like the sigil is the thing that had the effect. It was just the time that we spent talking about what this tattoo meant. So I think going into biological interfaces with a very like mindful and intentional approach can completely transform the outcome and the meaning of the interface, how it's used, how it's worn. Um, so then I talk a little bit about y'all are part of the next wave of pioneers in all of this, and you get to push the boundaries in all of these dimensions of the work that you're doing. Um, and I want to encourage you to think about healing, growth, transformation, um, consciousness, humanity, human experience, collective future in the utility of the work that you create. Because if you think even how much it's transformed our the way that we engage with each other, ourselves, the world, our self-concept, our sense of reality, even just interacting through computers, interacting with our world through technology that is embedded in our bodies or worn on our bodies very closely is kind of the next frontier of um, like a transfiguration of like our human mechs, you know? Um, so I think that's it for that one. And for me personally, I really want to take my tattoo praxis and my experiences with technology, with healing, with studies in quantum physics, quantum consciousness. That's been kind of like a special interest for the last like since COVID, really. Um, and my neuroscience research, which is more like hard science, and to build concrete material interfaces that respond to physiological and emotional states while also holding the same conceptual and psychological transformative properties. Um, and I'm really interested in considering like microtechnology versus material science. Like if we're looking at sensors that send information or if we're looking at materials that respond to biological signals, I think that's an interesting consideration. And yeah, right now with my research at least, I'm finishing it to publication. I'm like working on some of the final revisions, and I'm also working on ideas for how it can be like materialized into wearable technology. So yeah, I'm very interested in everything that y'all have been doing. And let's see. So here I was just throwing in like case study ideas. I'm very intrigued specifically by the idea of a device that allows people to prevent pain flare-ups or intercept when their arousal is starting to like increase in response to pain signaling or stress that enhances, because it becomes like a vicious cycle. And then the main thing that happens is neuroplasticity comes out and your nervous system starts to actually rewire itself. Not irreversibly, but like very hard to reverse. So I'm interested in how you can intercept or block those kinds of like hyper reactivities of the neurons. And let's see what else. Yeah, and then I was just thinking about the cross-disciplinary aspect of all of this. And I mean, it really involves everything and anything. Like, I think there isn't any discipline or ideology that you couldn't bring into this. Um, I think it's extremely relevant and necessary. And I think it's also really important for people to be like mindful, responsible, and aware of the implications because, like, as we all know, there are a lot. For example, like bodily autonomy, privacy, personal data, cultural implications, societal implications, surveillance implications. I'm sure you're all thinking about these things. Um, And I also wanted to bring it back again to the spirit of experimentation and innovation and boundlessness and boldness of the underground world, and how people inhabit a state of radical transformation constantly. Identity is fluid. It expands your sense of consciousness and reality to just be able to consider all of the possibilities. My experiences for sure set the framework for me to be able to like put these complex pieces together. Like all of like the tattoo theory and the neuroscience research was like I like it was um it was an effortless like synthesis. Like it's how, you know, things kind of just merge in your brain, like the connections are just made. And it's because so many conversations were happening all the time and so much other thinking was happening that it like opened these pathways for the connections to really easily be made. And that's something that I've been like coming up against with kind of disbelief about the neuroscience research that I'm doing, because it's like a major connection that has just been missed in the literature. And it just took like a receptivity to something that you may not necessarily think to like draw connections between. So yeah, I just listed some takeaways that I think are really important in terms of the experimental spirit and how it influences the way we engage with our work and its legacy. And as my concluding thoughts, I want to emphasize the interconnectedness of scientific research, artistic practice, cultural experience, and spiritual perspective to create holistic and human-oriented tools as a unified vision. And also the necessity of interdisciplinary collaboration to push the boundaries, to create these interfaces that will define human experience. And also when confronting all of the myriad implications that could be, that we could face as a result of, you know, modern technology and how it can be utilized. And then I also, this one I think is very important too. I want to emphasize, I want to encourage everyone to broaden their own range of skill sets, interests, and perspectives, to broaden their own interdisciplinary activities, because the more you bring into your framework of understanding, the more complex and profound your work will be able to be for the people who it affects. And I think that is almost the main point that I would like to make with this presentation, is just to really expand. And then the other one is, how can we create a future with embedded technology or technology we closely interface with that doesn't take us out of our humanity and augment us beyond humanity, but actually deepen our relationship with our humanity, and using technology for connection, healing, internal and external change. And that concludes my presentation. And now I will open the floor to a Q&A if we have time.
Thanks so much, Ariel. So yes, we'll now open the floor to questions. So any questions? And if you have a question, we would appreciate it if you could come up front and introduce yourself. Yes, come on. Yes. Awesome. So start by introducing yourself.
Yeah, just directly talk.
Yeah. So she'll be able to see you here. Ariel. Okay. Awesome.
Hi. Well, thanks so much for the really rich presentation. I guess I have one question specifically in your very interdisciplinary approach, specifically on the part of scientific knowledge or your neuroscience background, and then how you worked that or with that into also very situated or subjective experience. Like how I wonder, like in your process of creating new work or even doing your tattooing experience with your clients, how do you navigate between these two kind of very different approach? Like how do you integrate them while you call it like a holistic approach? I think one moment I specifically interested in is like, for instance, in neuroscience or when you're mentioning like wearables, like sensors or those tools are giving like a very objective or like measurement that tries to tell like a standard way or data about someone, while you are also talking about in your process there will be like spiritual awareness, energy flows between like this collective or communal group of people. So I just really curious about that part of like how you weave them together or work that out, or do you feel any conflicting moments where you're fighting with,
Sure.
yeah.
I think that I used to, and I think the deeper I got into, like when you start getting really heady about something and you just go like down the rabbit hole, it starts to become really self-referential. And I think that I went so far into my own like theories about this that at a certain point, I'd fully, truly believe that it's all the same thing at this point. Which I want to try to expound on because the way that it presents and the way that we engage with it as humans is very different. But I believe that the abstract things like spirituality and energy flow are actually concrete and tangible. We just have different means of sensing them and we can't quantify them as easily. But I think that we can observe them. I think that it's a little bit more up for interpretation, but I do believe it to be a quantifiable thing. So I think that in integrating these, it has become a very fluid process because they kind of inform each other. Like, I feel that if I go too far into quantifiable data, I'm not seeing the full picture. And if I go too far into like spiritual or abstract senses, like sensing energy or sensing someone's vibes or something, you need to like be able to cross-reference them in the middle. And I think that that becomes a natural process when you spend a lot of time there, just because of maybe pattern recognition. Like you start to learn how those things inherently play off of each other, and to the point where they are like two ends of the same being. Like it's all, in my opinion, it's all just like the math of reality, and we can just interpret it in different ways. I don't know if that is like a very abstract answer. If there was, if there's something that you want me to be more specific about, though, I definitely can.
Oh yeah, I think it really helps because I'm researching in multi-species experience, and a lot of times I also encounter like a lot of people's connection with nature will be more spiritual, while there are more like scientific viewpoints on that.
Yeah.
I was like really curious about your thoughts, but yeah,
Yeah,
that kind of really answers the yeah.
exactly that. Like, I think that these spiritual connections that we feel are scientific. I think we just don't know how to measure them necessarily.
Mhm.
Like, even like a magnetic sense of direction that that so many animals have. Like, it's
Mhm.
something that we can't necessarily quantify. Like, in ourselves, like we even probably have a magnetic sense of directionality, but it is still something that is like it exists through our biology and in combination with our biology. So we can access it in a material sense in ourselves, I believe.
Mhm. Thank you. I'll let other yeah.
Thank you.
One more question. So I think we have time for one more question. Any questions? Ariel? Awesome. So I have a so I have a question. So I was really curious. I just found it super interesting about like how I think your concept around quantum tattoos, right? And about how the tattoos, even though we're not integrating them with technology or I mean electronics per se, but they do have this psychological effect, right, on the people that you are tattooing. And yeah, I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on that. And yeah, and do you think this is something that might be interesting to have like electronics or tech integrated into for sensing or for relaying this
Absolutely.
information? Yeah, I am just kind of curious about if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
I feel really interested in that. And I didn't have time to add to my presentation, like in a way that would be comprehensible enough about um, because I'm still understanding it myself, is like the actual like quantum mechanical ideas behind this as well. And especially with things like quantum computing and microtechnology, like I'm really interested in actually, could you repeat the question, the specific question again?
Yeah. So
It's
I was
about,
just yeah curious about your thoughts on how the tattoos that you produce, right? Especially the ones that I think have a include like a deeper engagement with the person being tattooed. There often is sort of like a psychological effect on the person, like
yeah,
maybe it makes them feel calm or yeah, I'm just kind of curious about
like
that.
can
Yeah.
interface that with like wearable technology.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it could even be as simple as the design element. I think
Right.
that with tattoos, it's especially intense because it's not just like something you're putting on you, it's something that you're putting in you. And it is like you experience pain through the process. Like there is a purging experience that happens that makes it, that elevates it to like a new level of personal intensity. That's something that I really love about tattooing is there's like a sacrifice that's made
Mm.
by the person who's getting it. And I think, but no matter what, you can still pull out personal meaning in the design approach,
Mm.
in the specific thing. I mean, even things like, I don't know, I think about how I feel when I wear like my favorite coat that I like feel like myself in when I wear this coat. Like we do have this connection to garments too, to things that we put on us that express our sense of identity.
Mhm.
And I think that through just design alone in wearable technology, you can for sure tap into the same emotional potency in the people if I think if the right conversations are had, like if the level of vulnerability is reached. Um, but even beyond that, it can also be just something empowering. It can be something that's like personalized. I think there are endless ways. And I'm really interested in, because I mean, you can think of that part as more like what is the subconscious effect of the way that the process is approached in terms of the how the psychology of the person is handled and like what it means to them. I would be really interested to see um, all of the ways in which that could be explored because I think it's really there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Any final questions, comments? Well, Ariel, thank you so much. Just wanted to let you see the audience. They're gonna let us please
Thank
give our
you.
round of applause for a wonderful talk. Thank you so much.
Thank
Really
you for
appreciate
having
your
me.
time. Yeah, thank you.
I really appreciate you. I appreciate what you guys do there. Big
Thank
fan.
you.
I'm really glad that I got to be part of this.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We learned a lot. Thank you.
I'm
Have a
glad.
great day.
You
Bye.
too. Bye.
Bye.